Well, hey guys, it's Mr. Schaber, and welcome to our discussion on immigration. In this discussion, we'll kind of look at immigration from about 1870 to 1920, that 50-year period where perhaps more immigrants came into this country during that time than in any other 50-year period in U.S. history. Uh, if this isn't the period where the most came in, then it's darn close. Millions of people poured into this country, and looking for a new way of life and new opportunities. And so maybe some of your ancestors came during this time, and uh, and maybe you have stories about them. Maybe you know about them. Maybe these are stories that have been passed down throughout your family history. So let's look at immigration. Let's look at some pictures. Let's look at some people, because that's what it's about, right? Is people and their dreams and their hopes. And so let's look at those. First, let's establish that to emigrate means to exit, to leave a place. The E, emigrate, exit, and to immigrate, to come into a place. So emigrate, exit, immigrate, come into. Pretty easy, but just so you understand those terms. Now, the first question I think we need to look at is, why do people emigrate? Why do people exit a given place to go to somewhere new? And so we have to look at these things called push factors, things that push people out of their native lands. What would cause you to uproot your life, your family, and move to a new place? Well, there are numerous things, and this list is not comprehensive, but for example, catastrophes. Maybe, in history, for example, the Irish potato famine. You had a famine, you couldn't grow food. Well, people emigrated, they left, right? Political reasons, maybe oppressive governments, revolutions, things like that, that you just have to get out of there. Religious reasons, maybe you're part of a religion that gets persecuted and you're looking for a new start and new freedom somewhere else. Economic reasons, maybe you don't have a job, you can't afford good housing, can't afford land, things like that. And a lot of people have left their native lands throughout history to go to somewhere else because of that reason. And sometimes you just have demographic changes, population changes uh, that push somebody out, whether it's a population reduction or a population explosion. And so those are some reasons, not all the reasons, of course, but some of the reasons why people leave a given place, why they emigrate. Now, what brings people into a place? Why do they immigrate into a given place? Well, let's look. Let's look at these things called pull factors. What's pulling somebody in? Things that bring someone into a new place. You're going to see there's a lot of overlap between push and pull factors. And so, political reasons. Maybe people are looking for new rights and freedoms. I mean, how many people have come to this country throughout the history of the United States because of the freedoms and opportunities we offer here? Religious reasons. Freedoms that are offered here in the religious realm that are not offered in their native land. Maybe they have family members already here, and the family members tell them, "Hey, come over. It's a good, it's good here. There's a chance for you to succeed, whatever the reason may be." But family members already here, so a lot of people have come over for that reason, and economic reasons, a chance for a better job, a chance to own land. There's just more opportunity to get ahead, and so again, these are just a few of the reasons, probably some of the main reasons, but a few of the reasons that people would immigrate, especially to the United States throughout history. Now, if you look at this map is cool, I think. If you look at the growth of the cities from 1870 to 1900, this just shows you uh, we had so many people come into this country during this time. But you can see where the biggest cities in the country were. And you can see how they grew. The population in 1870 is marked by the red dot, and the outer ring, the yellowish outer ring, is how much more they grew by 1900. So places like Chicago, and of course New York City, and I mean, Boston. Some of these cities just exploded because of immigration, and so you know the the immigrant population, which again, we are all immigrants in one way, shape, or form because our ancestors came here. Unless you're 100% Native American, your ancestors came to this country from somewhere else, and you and I are products of that. So, a question I think we need to ask real quick is what challenges do people face when they immigrate to the United States? Whether it be in history when they immigrated or even today when people still come here. And challenges are, well, if you've ever lived in a new place, if you've ever moved houses, if you've ever moved cities, schools, if you've ever moved to a different country, there are certain challenges that people face. And obviously, those things include or could include things like language, if you move to a different country, uh, finding jobs, living conditions, okay, especially when people immigrated in the old days. A lot of times the tenement apartments, the poor sanitation, the poor conditions, those living conditions were tough. Sometimes immigrants face discrimination, and just the culture changes, the foods, the clothing, the religions, different things like that. All those changes, some of them they're exciting, they're fun, and some of them are very difficult. So regardless of where a person came from, when they immigrated to the United States in throughout history, they faced challenges, and I think we need to respect people for that. And but of course, it's through overcoming our challenges and our adversities that we grow and we learn about ourselves and we become better. So that's what these immigrants did. Now, some pictures. Just pictures say 1,000 words. And how many of these people in these pictures that we're going to look at could be your ancestors? Maybe your ancestors knew them, crossed paths with them. Who knows, right? But here's a family seeing the Statue of Liberty in the harbor there, a beautiful sight for so many immigrants throughout the U.S. history. Let's look quickly at the places immigrants came when they arrived in the United States. Uh, Castle Garden was kind of the original receiving center on near the southern tip of Manhattan, New York. It's where most of the immigrants from Europe arrived in the U.S. for most of the 1800s. And so a lot of people came through those doors. But that would change in 1892. In 1892, the federal government opened a huge reception center for immigrants on Ellis Island in New York Harbor, near where the Statue of Liberty had been placed in 1886. Ellis Island was almost like its own city, with a huge reception hall, dormitories, a hospital, a money exchange, and other facilities. Today, of course, it's a historical center, kind of a museum where you can tour and see for yourself where immigrants and maybe your ancestors came into this country. In 1892, the government started requiring that all new immigrants undergo a physical examination to make sure they were healthy before they came into the country. And those that were found to have an infectious disease faced quarantine or deportation. Sometimes that happened, or one member of a family might have to be deported. I mean, what would you do then, right? But those kind of things occurred when people had diseases. If they were healthy, after their physicals, immigrants showed their documents to officials and then collected their baggage. And if they had the address of friends or relatives, they headed off to find them. Sometimes maybe a father came over and worked for a year or two or three and saved up enough money to send for the rest of his family. And of course, he would try to be there at the reception center at Ellis Island when his family arrived. But you tried to, at first, a lot of immigrants tried to meet up with family or friends. Those who were on their own, of course, had a much harder time. And a lot of the people that came through New York as immigrants stayed in New York, and that's why it grew so big. But a lot of people as well tried to settle in areas established by previous settlers from their homeland. So you started to see, uh, large, for example, a lot of Germans ended up, that you come through Ellis Island, but you'd end up going, uh, for example, to the Midwest to farm, to Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, and eventually to places like North and South Dakota and Iowa. Uh, you know, you had a lot of Irish would settle in Boston And and just you get the idea, right? But people would try to go often where they had others who maybe spoke their native language or knew their customs and culture. But a lot of people stayed in New York, but a lot of people moved on from there after arriving at Ellis Island. Here are some pictures of Ellis Island, how it looked in the old days, how an immigrant might have seen it through their eyes. There's a view from the top and the side. You can see it's pretty big facility, and it had a lot of space, a lot of rooms, a lot of different things it offered for immigrants. Here it is today, and you can see if you want to tour it, you can get out there by driving. Normally you take a boat and you go out for a tour, but you can see. I'll show you another picture in a second, but it's a large facility, and there it is from the top. You can see how big it is. And so some of you may have been there before, some of you will go there to visit, but pretty cool place. Now I want to show you some pictures of the people. Some of these old pictures are so cool. You can kind of see the old styles of dress and the luggage and just it's so interesting. But here it says Ellis Island immigrants waiting to go on the barge. So people that had come to Ellis Island going to get on a barge, go across to New York City, and start their new life. Can you imagine? Imagine the thoughts and the feelings, the emotions that are going through their mind, through their body, as they think, "Wow, my new life is across the harbor there, and that's a big city I'm looking at." What do you notice about this picture? Well, it's almost all men, and that oftentimes happened in certain cases where, like I said, the fathers would come over first and try to work and get their footing and then make money and send for their family later on. So it wasn't always just big families coming over, but a lot of times these boats had more men on them at first, and then the families would come later. Here's a painting of what immigrants might have seen in the New York Harbor there with the Statue of Liberty and just their hopes and dreams and their anxiety and trepidation as well, looking at New York City, which by 1900 especially is one of the biggest cities in the world as far as the skyline, and we started building skyscrapers, and people would look at that. I mean, pretty much for almost all these immigrants, New York City is going to be the biggest city they've ever seen. And so, can you imagine what's going through their minds as they're looking at it? So here are some immigrants. It says arriving to be processed. They would go down, they'd go through the physical examination, people would check their paperwork and their documentation, and and then they would, if they passed and through the physical part, and they would then be able to move on. There's an old time picture. I just love these old pictures. I mean, you can kind of see a little bit sometimes by how they're dressed, where they might be from. Look at the old style of clothing and shoes, and I think it's just so interesting. Of course, men and women, kids, almost everybody wore hats. When you're out in public, you wore a hat. That was just kind of what you did usually, but pretty cool. There's a mom with some kids. We assume they're probably hers. And where's the husband? Maybe he's coming to pick them up. Maybe they're going to meet him. It says Hungarian on the bottom there. So these people are from Hungary. Don't know where this lady's from and her family, but she's that's pretty cool talent, right? You guys try doing that. Try to carry your baggage on your head. But they're looking at that camera, wide-eyed, going, "Wow, what's in store for us?" Same type deal here, right? Looking at this family, and you just wonder what people were thinking, as this new adventure in life is beginning. People pointing across the harbor there through the fog, through the mist. Probably looking at New York City or the Statue of Liberty. This picture's pretty cool. A lot of the kids, right? And that girl with her doll there on the right-hand side, and that vase, that pitcher. Uh, Maybe their prized possession, right? I mean, you couldn't carry a whole lot. A lot of these people didn't have a whole lot, and they were looking for a better life here. But you couldn't carry a whole lot on the boat, so you had to pick and choose kind of what you brought over. But where are these people from? And pretty cool. Wow, just look into their eyes. This ship was the Princess Irene going to Ellis Island, all right? Immigrants from Princess Irene ship. Look at that. Carrying everything they own, basically. More pictures, right? People looking at the camera going, wow, picture. What is that? What is that thing taking? What is that thing snapping a bright light at me, But wow, look at that. Here's the inspection line where people would be inspected at Ellis Island. Look at those ladies on the right there, those hats. Oh my goodness, what they got, like birds on those things or something? But you'd be inspected, make sure you're okay, check out documentation, things like that. This may be my favorite picture of all. I mean, you gotta love this. Where are these people from? Who knows? Probably Eastern Europe somewhere, right? Could be Russia, could be Ukraine, could be somewhere like that, somewhere cold with those hats. But you got the little boy with his sister, and the little girl's not happy. She's got her doll there, and they have their document cards. And look at those old shoes and the old style of dress. They didn't really have a lot of kids' clothes. Today, kids' clothes is a huge business, right? You pay as much for little kids' clothes with just a tiny bit of material as you do for the adult clothes. But back then, they pretty much dressed kids like they dressed adults, just smaller clothes. And so crazy, but love that. Doesn't it? That little boy has the face of like an old man, but it's oh man, you wonder what these kids grew up to be, right? In this new land of hope and opportunity, the United States. At Ellis Island, New York City in the distance. Look at that skyline. They're probably going, oh my goodness, what's behind those big buildings? What is going on over there? You just wonder. Here are some pictures where we know where the people are from. Here are people from Ireland. And just look at the style of dress as you look at these different nationalities here. A young Russian Jewish girl in the great hall at the reception center. The German immigrants. Look at the guy's hat. Kind of the old pilgrim hat, right? But the mom's got the little one wrapped to her back. Interesting. The Italian immigrants. Just looking at the camera. These people were they were in for a new, like I said, adventure and just new experiences. And I'm sure they were excited. I'm sure they were nervous, but yeah, I mean, you just had to put your nose to the grindstone and work, right? Because things weren't just given to people back then. And there were no welfare programs or other things. And so people had to get going and they had to work and that was just the way of life. And that's what people expected to do. This is a great picture. These Greek immigrants on their wedding day. They're married at the Greek Orthodox Church in Portland. You got to love that. Greek immigrants on their wedding day. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. And here's immigrant kids from all over Europe. You can see Polish, Romanian, Yugoslavia, Italian, Russian. Wow. I mean, the United States truly is, a melting pot. Uh, People have come here from every other country in the world, and At different times in history, you had more people that came from certain parts of the world, um, but man, we've had just tens and tens and tens of millions of people have immigrated to this country over the years, and it's just amazing. We're a melting pot, we're a salad bowl, whatever you want to call it, right? Of just all different nationalities and different religions and different languages, and you got to love it though, right? That the different foods and the different styles of clothing and all the different parts of the cultures that people have brought with them. A lot of people, most people have come here over the years and they want to become American. In the end, you want to be American, but you still preserve your native culture, at least parts of it, right? Whether it be the religion or the language to some degree, or maybe a ton. Maybe a lot of people became bilingual, and some people just kept speaking their native language at home exclusively, right? And how cool is that, right? But the language, the religion, the foods, the style of dress, just all those different parts of the culture that enrich uh, what it means to to be an American and to live in this country. We just all learn from each other's experiences and and cultures. Pretty cool. All right, real quick, let's look at Angel Island. So that was Ellis Island, and most of the immigrants that have come from Europe, of course, to this country throughout history, you know, at least in the old days, came through Ellis Island. But Angel Island was the receiving center near San Francisco, where immigrants from Asia and the Pacific came to the United States. So they didn't, of course, go through Ellis Island. That wouldn't make any sense. They came to the West Coast and came through the San Francisco area and through Angel Island. And here are a few pictures of immigrants from coming through Angel Island. You can see these from Asia. Chinese immigrants um, that came through to work on the railroad. We talked about the Transcontinental Railroad. A lot of them came through, of course, to before the railroad to find gold in the gold rush in California in the late 1840s, early 1850s, and then in the 1860s, the Transcontinental Railroad, of course, brought a lot as well. So Chinese workers on the railroad. Here are some Japanese immigrants coming through Angel Island. And so I guess the question is, as you've looked at these different places where immigrants came through and different and pick, faces of different people, what character traits help people succeed in new situations? I want you to ask yourself that question. I mean, obviously, we've all been in new situations that were previously unfamiliar to us. Maybe a little scary, they were different, they were new, and so what character traits help people succeed in those situations? Whether you be an immigrant from Italy or Russia or Japan, or you move schools or you move to a new state and you don't know anybody. You get a new job and you don't know anybody and you have to get used to the job, and whatever the situation is, when you are in a new situation, what character traits help someone succeed? And you can probably list 1,000 different things, but if a person's going to succeed in their new situation, uh, you know, obviously, I'm sure we could probably all come up with a few things in common: hard work, perseverance, courage, uh, being friendly, being kind, um, things like that. That if you're willing to kind of jump in with both feet, get to know people, and work as hard as you can, there's a good chance you're going to succeed. And so, if you think about what these immigrants have had to do throughout U.S. history, these are your ancestors, right? These are at some point along your family line, somebody came here and had to have that American experience for the first time in your family history. And then their kids had the experience, but they were a little more used to it. And then their kids had the experience, but they were more used to it, right? Until we come down the family lines to us. And so it's kind of cool if you think about it that way. But think about what character traits you need to succeed when you're in a new situation. And, do you do those things? And are you willing to do those things? And so it's something to think about. All right. I want to show you a few pictures now. What immigrants saw, a lot of what immigrants worked on. Of course, we had talked about Andrew Carnegie and the steel, right? Carnegie steel and how he made his, you know, well, in today's terms, hundreds of billions by selling steel. And of course, steel was in high demand because now we're building cities with steel, skyscrapers, of course, cars and trains and other things. But the cities are built out of steel. And New York City was the biggest of them all and rose the highest of them all. And so this is what immigrants saw when they came here. And this is what they, and like I said, this is what they worked on. Who do you think built New York City? Who do you think built the skyscrapers? Well, they were immigrants. And man, can you imagine doing that? What that guy's doing up there? He's got the wrench out, and he's who knows how many feet above the ground. There's a just cool picture of New York City in the background. You might recognize that building right behind him. All right. The bridges behind him that span across the waterways. But good grief, can you imagine? This has got to be one of the great pictures of all time, right? Lunch atop a skyscraper. A famous black and white photograph taken in 1932 during the construction of the RCA building at 30 Rockefeller Center in Manhattan, New York City. The men are 840 feet above the city streets, taking a lunch break, right? Oh my gosh, I'm afraid of heights. That would not have been the job for me. Can you imagine trying to walk across those beams from one place to another? What if a gust of wind comes up, right? These guys are out there like it's nothing. They're eating lunch, they're talking. Oh my goodness. Now, quite a few guys died building these skyscrapers, as you can imagine. But I don't know how anybody lived. And so it's a miracle that any of them survived, but this is just incredible. So New York City, of course, because so many immigrants stayed there and so many people lived there, just became this melting pot of its own. And of course, you can see most of New York City, most immigrants were poor in the old days. And you lived in these crowded, congested neighborhoods and I mean busy city streets, right? And you had the fire escape balconies out behind the apartments, and down below you had people selling goods and food and all kinds of stuff. That would have been it would have been so interesting. Take a time capsule back and just walk through New York City in 1900 or 1905 or 1915, and just to see, especially certain parts of New York City um, that were just so immigrant filled, and just to see the diversity and imagine you could get some pretty good food, some good street food back then. This is a great picture, right? A home visitor takes a shortcut over the roofs of the tenement. Sometimes you could get places by these apartment buildings that were all, stuck together, crammed together. You could just take the shortcut on the roof from one apartment to the other. That's what this lady's doing. And here are some of those New York City apartments, these tenements as they're called. We've talked about them briefly. Tenements were again, the poor conditions, poor sanitation. They were small and cramped. A lot of immigrant families lived in these because, that's what they could afford. But I love the old pictures of the laundry hanging out between the buildings. Uh, Again, maybe these are some of your ancestors, right? And, do the laundry and hang it out to dry, and then you reel it in, and your neighbor does it and hangs it out to dry, and then they reel it in, right? How cool is that? Another awesome picture. These kids out on the fire escape, laundry hanging with the American flag. That kid got the American flag out. So cool, these pictures. Man, not a lot of room for kids to play, right? That's the bad part about the tenement apartments is that, they had to go down to the street level and run around in the street, and maybe play in the fire hydrant, water, in the summer if they let one go for, kind of a sprinkler effect. And but there wasn't a lot of room to play, and so kids had to do their best. They had to, man, just different world, back then, and also, of course, in these crowded cities versus out in the open, right on farms or other places. But cool picture. And then this is the inside, for example, of a tenement apartment. You can see how cramped it is, and you wouldn't have a whole lot of room. Of course, uh, in the early days, no flushing toilets, right? You had to go down to the street level, and you have an outhouse. No running water, of course. I mean, can you imagine going to a well and having to lug buckets of water up 3, 4 flights of stairs, or for whatever? I mean, crazy. So, but that's what these people did. They were tough. You had to be tough to survive. And that was just the only, there was no other option. And so these people really laid the groundwork. They were the trailblazers for the lives we live today. And then another picture here. Aren't you thankful for your home and the conditions you live in, right? Uh, but again, the laundry hung out between the apartment buildings. On this one, picture on the right, of course, you look down, you got the stuff going on in the street. Looks like they did let a fire hydrant go, or for some water down there on the picture on the right. But wow, just amazing what life would have been like. So if you think about it, then we owe a lot to the immigrants. We owe a lot to our ancestors, and I hope you appreciate what they've done for you. And I know I try to appreciate what mine have done for me, and I'm always learning more about them, and I appreciate them more and more as I learn more about them. I come to love them more, and I'm thankful for what they did.